What happened to a society that valued objective truth? That said, look, I might be wrong, I might be right, you might be wrong, you might be right. Let's debate about it. Let's have a go and really honestly pursue truth together. And the outcome isn't you win, I lose, or I win, you lose. The outcome is we win because we're getting closer and closer to truth, objectively and honestly, instead of this insults that people take from having their ideas challenged. Like, it's not a threat to your identity and your dignity if you're wrong. That's human. and we can all be wrong. Heaven save me from the friends who won't tell me when I'm wrong.
Well, you're asking what happened to all of that? Poststructuralism happened. That's what happened.
Is that another? I'm not familiar with the term post-structuralism. I'm familiar with postmodernism. Is that the same thing by another name?
Oh, yeah, they're different philosophies, but they grow out of each other and merge in interesting ways. But the idea is basically that truth is relative, that there is no absolute truth, and that we can't know what is true, that we're all working through our own prism of assumptions. And of course, now what queer theory says is, or what the advocates of queer theory would say, is that we're all working through a heteronormative worldview. And because we come at the world through this lens, through the assumption that there is a gender binary, that boys will grow up to be boys and girls will grow up to be girls, and they'll probably quite fancy each other and get together and have children, that's a heteronormative worldview that doesn't accommodate other people. So just the fact that we think that's normal then discriminates against people for whom that is not normal.
And so just to clarify, heteronormative is a word that's pejoratively used by progressives to describe people who they would say are forcing and imposing their beliefs based on their own heterosexual experience and saying that this is normal and thereby insulting people who disagree with their version of normal, even though it's based in reality.
Absolutely. And maybe this is something we could unpack a bit more, because this is really the crux of why queer theory is being pushed through schools. Because if you think that heterosexuality is normal, and we live in a heteronormative culture, there is so much of our media, all the romance stories, most of the movies that we go to watch all show romances, heterosexual romances between gender congruent people. There's very little visibility of transgenderism. There's the tokenistic gay character these days, but mostly the main plot line is about a heterosexual couple and the assumption that heterosexuality is normal. So everything in our law, our toilets, our marriage, our family structures assumes that heterosexuality is normal. And if we do that, if we're assuming that heterosexuality is normal, then we are, by implication, assuming that homosexuality, bisexuality, pansexuality, transgenderism are not normal, which is discriminatory, obviously, because we're not only making them invisible, we're marginalising them. So we've got this thing as the norm, and they're not included in the norm, which means that heteronormativity is not inclusive and it's not supportive of diversity. There's only one norm. And if you then unpack what's behind safe schools, or Ros Ward's particular mission, for example, she would say that this heteronormative worldview is the same thing as LGBT discrimination. So just by thinking that heterosexuality is normal, we are, and by that I only mean it's the norm experience. And actually, let's face it, this is necessary to the reproduction of the species. So it's sort of built into our DNA, I would think.
And it's not an opinion. It's not a subjective opinion. That's a quantifiable, statistically demonstrable reality. Heterosexual reproduction is normal. I'm sorry if I've just committed hate speech.
Yes, it's very tricky to say that now, because if you say one thing's normal, you're automatically insulting everything that might be around that. So you're not allowed to say that anything's different now. And I think this is one of the problems. We're not allowed to say that a heterosexual relationship is different from a homosexual relationship, even if it has different biological aspects to it. Because saying that something is different is discriminatory. We can't make distinctions without an inferred hierarchy where one is better than the other.
And here's the problem with the hijacking of the word discriminatory. Like, duh. Yeah, there is discrimination. Discrimination's a wonderful thing. Discrimination's absolutely necessary. We discriminate between a good speed and a safe speed and a dangerous and a reckless speed. That's discrimination. We discriminate between acceptable behaviour around children and unacceptable behaviour around children.
That's fine. So just there's a couple of things that I want to come back to there. So one is the idea that we should actually throw out heteronormativity and bring in queer theory instead for everybody, because if we do that, queer theory includes everybody, doesn't it? Because queer theory doesn't say heterosexuality is bad. It doesn't say anything about heterosexuality, to be honest. Heterosexuality is invisible if you look at the world through the lens of queer theory, because there are, 96 different sexual orientations, and heterosexuality is one of them. But the idea is that queer theory is inclusive, so we need to get rid of heteronormativity and all believe queer theory instead. So that's one of the political agendas behind adopting queer theory as a lens through which to view the world, because then everybody is included.
And they don't see that as discriminatory or intolerant at all.
No. And this was, it's interesting because I was having this debate with some students who were saying, no, queer theory includes everybody. What's wrong with it? I think queer theory is actually homonormative and transnormative. What it doesn't affirm and support is heterosexuality at all. I don't see my experience as being visible if I look at the world through queer theory at all. And considering that probably the majority of the population would still consider themselves to be heterosexual, then I think having a framework that doesn't include a majority is probably going to be slightly problematic, for me at least. But some of these individuals that I was talking to are completely on board with queer theory. This is the inclusive, egalitarian way to view the world. So we really just need to get rid of heteronormativity, because heteronormativity is the same thing as LGBT oppression. So if you make heteronormative assumptions, you are colluding with and supporting a worldview that is responsible for discrimination. So that makes you a hateful bigot. So that's one of the things that I wanted to pick up on. And there was another thing that you were talking about just now.
Race, gender.
Race. Yeah, that's right. So since we're getting onto the really nuggety little bits of the gay rights movement, there are two things that are essential to this. The Born That Way narrative is essential to the idea that the homosexual community is a identity-based victim group. If you challenge the Born That Way narrative, then suddenly it's a lifestyle choice. And you can't say that someone's discriminating against me on the basis of my lifestyle choice, because you're not going to get any sympathy from the crowd. You will get sympathy from the crowd if you say, I was born this way, I can't help it, and you're picking on me because of that, or you're treating me differently because of it. And it's very interesting to note that if you go back through the homosexual rights movement, nobody ever claimed that they were born that way until the 80s. They mimicked the civil rights movement, which they saw what success that had, because, obviously people who discriminate against blacks are racists. Nobody would support that. This was an incredibly successful civil rights movement. And so they borrowed the narrative of that because if you are born that way, and a lot of homosexuals feel that they came out of the womb hardwired for homosexuality, I would question that, because I think sexuality is culturally constructed. It's to do with experience and exposure and ideation. There's all sorts of influences that would affect the way your sexuality develops. Now, probably most of us as adults feel that we are firmly homosexual or firmly heterosexual, but I think that between the womb and adulthood, there's all sorts of things that can influence that one way and another. And I'm not the only one to say so. I was just looking at a YouTube clip of Milo Yiannopoulos, who says exactly this. And he points out that this is only a narrative that came into being in the 80s, and that it is incredibly powerful, because if you believe that homosexuals were born that way, then anybody who differentiates between homosexuals and non-homosexuals is a hateful bigot.
So the gay lobby started a big lie in the 80s. Now, the religious right was saying that homosexuality was a sinful lifestyle choice. It was an immoral way to behave, an immoral set of decisions that you were making. It was based on Christian doctrine that, you hate the sin, not the sinner, right? So you can love this person, but what they do is not making God happy. So Christians would say homosexuality is a sinful lifestyle choice. The gay lobby were kind of stumped by this because, of course, according to Christians' own set of values, yeah, it is. There's no way you can go from that, really. So what they did is they kind of came up with this gay gene thing. It's like, wait a minute. What if we're like black people? What if we were born this way and we've got no way to change it? That would make everybody who doesn't like us into the most massive bigots. Let's go with that.
And that allows people like Peter Van Onselen then to hate you because you are a hateful bigot. It gives the left license to vilify, hate, and express all kinds of hate and bigotry towards people that simply disagree with them on the basis of reality.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. And I think that for people my age and younger, they've grown up entirely with the Born That Way narrative. Now, it's another interesting thing that Paul McHugh and the Mayer report concluded was that there is no biological scientific basis for the Born That Way narrative.
Right.
It's another reason that they don't like that particular report, because they've gone looking for the gay gene and they couldn't find it. There's all sorts of theories and all sorts of different scientific studies that have been done, but none of them have concluded that there is a genetic predisposition towards homosexuality. So once we get past that problem of whether you're born that way or not, we still have the problem that the homosexual community have decreased mental health. It's problematic. They're not such happy people as the rest of the community. And then, of course, the counter-narrative to that is that that's our fault. That's the result of social stigma. Now, again, all of the social studies, and you can commission whatever social studies research you would like, but particularly there's a document from Sweden, a research project in Sweden. Now, Sweden's one of the more progressive countries, and it was studying suicide rates among married homosexual couples and the not married homosexual community. And they found that the rates of suicide were just as great among those that were married as those that weren't. So if you could reduce social stigma as much as possible, this is the country in which you would find that, and yet the suicide rates are still just as high. And so
there is no evidence, is there? There is no evidence to support the theory, the manipulative, atrocious, gross accusation that debate about homosexual marriage leads to an increase in suicide amongst homosexual people. There's absolutely no factual study or basis for that at all. Can you comment further on that?
I think it's very irresponsible. We're seeing this a lot thrown around by the government at the moment, that all of these people are going to be hearing hateful, nasty things from hateful, nasty people. Now, those hateful, nasty things might only be disagreement with the narratives of the homosexual lobby. Certainly, we don't mean to offend anybody. We're not going to insult anybody gratuitously, but we do defend our right to be able to talk about the science. Yes. And how do we know that these things are true or not, and to critique the narrative.
Yep.
But if anything, I think if anyone's going to be putting suicidal ideation in these people's heads, it's not us. And I am concerned that not only are we being blamed, but this is actually a very irresponsible thing for the government to do.
Yes. Look, thank you so much for your time and expertise in explaining all this. I'm sure there'll be lots of viewers' comments and questions. And it's ridiculous that we're at this point where we've got to make a decision about the future of Australian society, and we can't even have an honest debate, because disagreement is hate speech, because truth is hate speech, because the facts are unwelcome, unwanted, and offensive. Well, I'm sorry, if the truth offends you and if the facts offend your feelings, then perhaps you're not on the right side of the objective good. in this debate. And at the very least, we should be able to have an honest discussion on why you feel that way. But completely censoring one side of a debate is no way to run a pluralistic, inclusive, secular, liberal democracy like the one we're trying to build and maintain in Australia. So, Dr. Elisabeth Taylor, thank you very much for making your research and your time available to share with us today. And we'll look forward to seeing more of your writing and articles from the Australian Christian Lobby.
Thank you very much. Thank you, David, for such an interesting chat. I've really enjoyed it.
Thank you very much for watching Church and State with Dave Pellowe. Feel free to like and comment on the YouTube channel, subscribe, go to the website churchandstate.com.au and subscribe to email updates there. We try and send it out weekly, but sometimes the week gets away from us. And if you can, become a partner. We rely on your donations, and small monthly partnerships like $3 a month will actually help us keep this information and commentary service going. And while we're at it, you may agree with 100% or 90% of what the Australian Christian Lobby says, but they are the most effective voice out there representing traditional Australian Judeo-Christian values, and they're also very, very worthy of whatever financial partnership you might be able to invest in defending the future and the freedom of Australian society. So thanks again for watching, and we'll see you online.
Thanks for watching. If you really enjoyed that video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Have a look at this great video next, and check out the website for even more interesting articles and episodes later.